Good morning, good afternoon. Hi, James, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Nice to nice to meet you and see everybody else and the cool avatars. I need to update mine. I'm not I need to get into it. Anyway, but yeah. Thanks for having me.
No, we're excited to have you for this hour. Again, I'm Tammy Leary. Nice to see you guys virtually. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of moderating this awesome conversation with James Felton Keith. Just by way of intro, James is an award-winning engineer and economist who was the first Black LGBTQ person to run for federal office in this country. He currently runs the world's leading certifying body in diversity and inclusion and lectures on inclusion at the University of Georgia. I know we've got probably a handful of alum on this meeting. So UGA, as an entrepreneur and author, he established the first international diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging certification and wrote a biopolitical philosophy book titled Inclusionism. So hi, James. We're really happy to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
You're absolutely. To kick us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and, touch on your passion for uncovering unconscious bias?
Sure. Well, wow, I guess if I go back, I'm trying to figure out. When that question, I'm always trying to think, how far do you go back? Well, I'm originally from Detroit, so I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. In the 80s. I've been out of Detroit for a while now, I guess longer than I was there. But I did my first 18 in Detroit. I left Detroit. I immediately came down south. I went to undergrad at Tuskegee in Alabama. So we're just about an hour and a half outside of ATL for anyone not familiar with the area.
HBCU.
Yeah, HBCU, founded by Booker T. Washington. Just a really great time. I got to grow up, down there. We thought of ourselves as city people. So it was like we're getting out of the city until we met all the New York and LA people who swear that no one else is from a city. If you're from New York and LA, no shade. I'm, not picking on you, but you all are a little bit aggressive about your idea of what's a city and what's not. So anyway, and I live in New York now, and people are like, "Where's your accent?" I'm like, I still have a Midwestern accent, so you can't shake it. Anyway, but no, yeah, I started there. I started my career as a mechanical engineer. Went back to school and sort of transitioned into macroeconomics. And if I had to pick the root of my passion for inclusivity, for especially specific to the workplace, I think it's really about economic inclusion and how we include people in the normal economy in general. I think someone's off mute. But...
Yeah, maybe we could take a moment and mute all of our participants. Thank you. Perfect. Go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, long story short, I think the first 10 years of my career, I started working in the 2000s in the auto industry, then transitioned to energy and then insurance. I worked in big tech for a while, offering big tech solutions mainly to the energy and insurance industries. So we got to see a lot of other companies through our clients through insurance. And a lot of my work was really rooted in what we call corporate change management. Around the 2010s, my career shifted to politics. I started advising a bunch of politicians, essentially, but as a business person. And, the 2010s were just a lot different from every other decade. It seemed like everything changed really fast, it scaled really fast. And I found myself sort of as the sole, Black guy who was willing to, come out and identify as bi and queer in political spaces with a suit on. And so I started, getting pushed towards via mentors that I had from Tuskegee and other places to do more of this work. And so I really ended up working as a chief information officer, which was my skill set at the time for a bunch of mayors. And while doing that, I ended up starting the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. And in starting that, I got fired. Long story short, everyone was like, get rid of this guy, because things started making, headlines. We were in the news. And if you've ever worked with politicians, it's really no knock on them. They want to control the communication cycle. That's sort of what they do. And they're like, we can't talk about this when we're trying to talk about water and housing and blah, blah, blah. And you're sort of disruptive. But in that, it changed my career. It sort of pushed me into the public figure and political fray, even though I still thought of myself as an engineer. When I realized who wasn't being represented in the halls of power in various places, whether it's at municipal or state or federal or international level, it changed my career and my perspective, but I still use my old skill sets as an engineer. And I think as engineers, for anyone who's familiar with engineers, process engineers, there are really three types of engineering. You got mechanical, electrical, and chemical. We're all really trained to do one thing: root cause analysis and error proof. And so I see all problems, back to your question about passion, really as distribution problems. If you all don't understand me in this talk, I'm just using the wrong language. It's a distribution problem. If we can't get, fresh water to where it needs to go, there's a distribution problem there, whether it's in the purification, the bottling, the actual distribution, you name it. And we can solve a lot of these problems if we're focused on the distribution of solutions. If we're focused on root cause analysis and the distribution of solutions. And so I spent a lot of my professional career in standards making, not just this new D&I standard, ISO 30415, but the cybersecurity standard. I wrote the majority, I would say, in the 2010s of the cyber laws, both here and in Europe. But also before that, a lot of IT standards making. And so my passion around inclusivity is really rooted in trying to plug, I might even argue it's quite selfish at the end of the day. Growing up, I didn't see a lot of opportunities for me to plug into the normal economy. And there are plenty of people like me around the country, even if I just think about, the Black folks in the country, of 40 million of us. And as I think about how we plug people into the normal economy and trying to solve that distribution problem, I think you have to work with organizations to build mechanisms to plug them in. And so I approach inclusivity in the same way we would approach, any other sort of mechanical, electrical, or chemical distribution problem. I know that might be overly nerdy. We can sort of dig into the weeds about that, but I've seen change happen in an incremental way in so many spaces over time. And while I know that, via the news cycle and things we hear in the streets that, things should change overnight. I know young people hate incrementalism. They argue with me all day about it in my face and online. But corporate change management and incremental change really does make a difference. For instance, when you just look at, I think, the two of us sitting here, on this talk, I don't know that 20 or 30 or however many years ago that we would have this opportunity, but we're a byproduct of incremental change over time. If I think about what we've been telling girls for the past 70 years, taking hold over the past 40 years, I think about corporate change and inclusivity, we've seen women go to college and graduate at a higher rate than people who identify like me for the past 40 years. And that's almost my whole life. And so now we all work for one of them. Or there's a debate about if we don't, if we should, and why didn't she get that promotion? When I went to Tuskegee, the ratio was 8-1. 8
women to men. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So anyway, I'm running on a bit, but I think my passion is really rooted in, I don't think that I'm sane enough to stick around long enough if I didn't think that I actually had the ability to affect some incremental change organization by organization. So I think, it gives me life seeing change happen incrementally, place by place, but I still, again, approach it as a process engineer or a mechanical engineer. It's like, what mechanisms can we implement to gradually change how a corporation does its business, whether that's distributing whatever the product or service that it makes, or distributing the people that make up that institution. And so I think we can influence all those through boxes and vectors, if you will. And that's just boxes and arrows for anyone not familiar with vectors. And that's really what I do. I've sort of turned into this communications person on behalf of, inclusivity, but really at my core, I'm thinking about the world in spreadsheets and boxes and vectors and trying to figure out which ones can we trigger to get some sort of incremental change so that the kids of tomorrow inherit a world that they think that they should, with all the opportunities that we promise to them. So So that's the work that I do. I'm just, trying to make a path for that kid from Detroit. And
That's
Detroit
right.
is nothing like New York. It's and it wasn't 40 years ago for sure. Anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the incremental piece really resonates with me. And I appreciate you sort of laying that foundation because there is a science to it. There is an objectivity to the work.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know how to bifurcate the
Yeah.
energy and the passion and the emotion from
Yeah.
the actual numbers behind it, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's interesting. Thank you for sort of setting that foundation for this discussion.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to really draw from you and help our team understand, because quite frankly, our organization is new to the DEI space.
Sure.
But incremental growth, incremental progress, right? So that's what we're doing here today. We're sort of living that.
Yeah.
Can you just sort of take one step back and talk to the team here about unconscious bias and just sort
Sure.
of define it and talk about some examples in the workplace and just sort of stay in that space with us for a little bit?
I think I have a good example from a corporate engagement standpoint, because look, at the end of the day, I mean, we all have biases, right?
Right.
And you have just, and whether we call them biases or not, I know some words can be catalyzed as triggers over time, but it's just generally about people know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. I've definitely been in those situations when I'm with, I've learned a lot. I feel like I'm at the bleeding edge of stuff right now. So I probably know a lot more than I should because of the people I'm interacting with. But, when it comes to issues of women or issues in the Asian American or the disabled community or the neurodivergent community, I wasn't always so wise about what's happening. But when I think about unconscious bias, I will say, number one, I am for trainings of sorts around unconscious bias, but not in a blanket way, like not in the, we're going to just cover the whole company or whoever, whether it's a company or government or whatever. Let's just talk about unconscious bias. It can, if delivered the wrong way, really start people at way before at a negative square one, if that's
Okay.
even. But regarding a real life scenario, I remember, so we consult at Inclusion Corporation or InclusionScore, my firm now. I would say we're the largest consultant entity around D&I. I know there are a lot of firms that do D&I in different silos, but regarding the ISO standard, so we define D&I as the ISO standard. We're in about 500 firms right now across 14 countries. We're an insurance underwriter on basically the types of insurance that get triggered through either retaliation or discrimination grievances. So we deal with a lot. And there's one in particular that I can think of that was in Georgia, large accounting firm. And, about 4 or 5 years ago, this is pre-pandemic, so, these firms were engaged in this topic before the pandemic in 2020. But, we had a series of roundtables with folks talking about unconscious bias in general and folks going around the room telling their story. And there was a man who worked, older, white man, generous guy. And I knew the guy, generous in at least how he engages like philanthropy and nonprofits and his church, et cetera. And folks were going around the table talking about where they grew up and what their neighborhoods were like when they grew up, just so that people could know who they were talking to. Like when I tell my Detroit story, I think it sets in people immediately, okay, this is who this guy is. I'm a Detroit kid first, even though I'm here in Manhattan now. And so everyone was going around and talking about who they knew. And this older guy said, really blanketed, he wasn't thinking about this. He just said in a blanketed way, he's like, well, in the neighborhood I grew up in Georgia, he's like, Black people weren't allowed to live in my neighborhood. It's like, so I grow up knowing people like you all, as he went around the table. And this guy was a year away from retirement. Just to put in perspective how long he had been in the company, let's assume he'd been working for 30, 40 years, right? And so there were other people around the table who were not offended in the exactly what he said, but in I guess how he delivered it, right?
Right.
And there was a general understanding on how he delivered this as they went around talking about unconscious bias. And so a woman stood up after him in this circle and started talking about what that felt like for her to hear it. She was a seasoned professional as well, not near retirement, but let's say around sort of in my current group, been around for a minute, where you're hearing the young people talk about they don't want incrementalism, but you're managing more than the folks who are ready for retirement. Again, all ages are good. But anyway, she was talking about how she felt, not necessarily about what he was saying. And the look on his face, because he hadn't really understood what she meant when she was telling him about how her family was affected, being from a similar area. Again, these people, they work at this company. They're from a couple of counties in that state. And so she was like, yeah, we lived in the other county, on the other side of the other train tracks. And this is why, blah, blah, blah. He just really, as a guy who'd been around for a bit, he just hadn't considered this at all. And his face dropped and he was apologetic. And I feel like we're seeing that around corporate world right now. No one wants to say the wrong thing, even if they're saying an honest thing. And I like to liken it to the stepping on my shoe analogy. I think that when you tell people that they're stepping on your shoe, most people will get off your shoe and they'll go a step further than that. They'll even apologize. He was apologetic to how she felt, but he was still just telling his story. And it is true, where he grew up, in the city he grew up in, folks that didn't look like him weren't in that place, right?
Right.
It's debatable whether that is unconscious bias or not, or whether you can pack that into a training. This type of training that I like to see the most is training where people are sharing their stories and talking about how they feel about the stories that they've heard, and they're humanizing each other and coming out of that, not necessarily thinking I'm going to go to this town or that town, or we're all having dinner together tomorrow, but at least you build an understanding for where people are coming from. And that sort of quashes the at least unconscious portion of the bias. Everyone is aware, but without wagging the finger to tell folks, well, you're a bad person because you don't know me. Like, there are plenty of people for plenty of cultures across the globe. And I feel like I've been everywhere that I never wanted to go, both living and visiting. I can't stand traveling at this point, but we could talk about that later in the talk. But there are people that I don't know, right, in those places, and I don't know what their lives are like. So, unconscious bias is just really the engagement of the unknown. I think where it becomes dangerous in any corporate setting is when it is brought to your attention that you're stepping on the foot of, and your response isn't noted. I'm sorry, I did not mean to step on your foot.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't mean that we always escalate to the next level where there, reprimands sent and, costs associated. Things can't escalate, and they do, right? But I think if a corporation's culture is do unto others, then you're starting at a good place. And facilitating meetings where folks can explore their biases without branding them as inherently biased, as if they can't change, I think is necessary. Because I think the biggest fear for folks who've been around more than a day is that we're suggesting that they can't change or that they can't learn new things. And it's just like telling the broader public that we think, that they're silly or that they're ignorant. It's just not the case. I think the vast majority of people are wise and aware, and they want to know new things. But I think as leaders, whether we're CEO of a company or VP of a space, or some sort of social or political leader outside of that, it is our duty to facilitate, or rather, to the earlier conversation, distribute those opportunities. I think that's where we see the incremental change. So, unconscious bias, a difficult phrase, but I know it's at the top of people's mind right now. But I really think it's just about what people don't know. I mean, I have some horror stories, but I won't go into them unless you take me there later.
Unless time permits. No, I think that example, because it was specific about the workplace, right? What a good nuanced example. Unconscious bias doesn't show up so egregiously and on the nose and clutch the pearls moment, right? This gentleman's statement, it was true. There was redlining in this country. Black people were not able to live in certain neighborhoods. So it's still a fact, but to say it in a matter-of-fact way and removing the pain associated
Yeah.
right? Because on the other side of that experience is pain, discrimination, segregation, right? Lack of access to quality foods. I mean, it just goes on and on and on in terms of the experience associated with that. So
He didn't know,
what a
right?
great example. Yeah.
His biggest thing was, but he was super again, you could see the moment that he knew because you could saw his face. It's like, oh, I know I'm on your foot. I didn't realize it hurt. You know, I didn't realize you were standing this close. I didn't realize your feet were so long. I didn't realize the pain was so long. I think there is a very real thing, not in this country, but in every country. I'll do the same thing between Hindu and Muslim populations in India. And in their constitution, when we talk about, you know, diversity here and we go, you know, gender, age, race, blah, 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 over there, they throw caste in there.
Yes.
And people are talking about being darker and from Chennai versus being lighter and from Mumbai. And so we see it everywhere.
Yes.
And some folks, if you grow up in a certain space, you just like, oh, I didn't know that it was that bad for you. I know now. What can we do? Because I just don't want you to be in pain here in this workplace. I don't know if we do the same things. I don't know if we're going to go play golf, shoot hoops, have a drink tea, whatever it is. I just know I don't want you to be in pain right now. I think that's the beginning point. That's the spark.
That's where it starts.
We see that everywhere. We see that more than we see the outright someone's walking to work and just boof you down a flight of steps. That doesn't happen. Not much, you know. Right. I'll say I've dealt with more age discrimination in the workplace than anything else because, well, I think I'm weathering now and I got a bad camera here, but previously when I had certain roles, people were like, get this kid out of here. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right.
And that was maybe aggressive, but it wasn't so aggressive because I was kind of, you know, a kid. Anyway, so yeah, we all have it. I have a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you, how can you sort of put into words where it comes from? I think there's some intuitive assumptions, what we learn from our parents, what we pick up through culture, all those things. But can you sort of put a little more methodology behind where biases come from and how we can, so that's the first part. And then the second part, how we can continue to mitigate them in the workplace.
So I can definitely answer the second piece is a lot easier for me, but I mean, the first piece around where it comes from, again, I think it could be a lot of different places. It could definitely be our upbringing, but it could also be how we're brought into corporate spaces, like how we engage with power, right? And by power, just means who's that executive, right? Who's teaching us lessons. You know, I can remember, I'm still embarrassed of this story to this day. When I was starting the Detroit's LGBT Chamber of Commerce, we had a meeting with a funder to fund the chamber. And I was there with our early board, who were a bunch of women, bunch of, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they all identify as lesbians, and we were all on this board, but I was a suit guy. I had grown up in the auto industry behind a bunch of old guys, and they were all guys at that point. And I thought that there was a way you talked at the top, because that's what they told me at golf courses and whiskey bars. I was taught, 20 years ago, you had to be able to drink whiskey in a certain way to be a viable entry point to some of these conversations. Like you got to
smoke a cigar.
A cigar problem because of that. So the thing is, I'm at this meeting and we're talking to this funder about this event that we're going to do, the first event that we were going to do at General Motors. Obviously, they're big, they're downtown in that city, right? And we're talking about this VP that we were dealing with, and she was this tall Russian woman that had, white hair going to the back. And I spent too long, because these women let me know when we left, talking about how she looked, because I thought that the meeting needed a little bit more sales, and that I didn't know these people. I think people also misassume that the L's, the G's, the B's, and the T's hang out together, and it's quite the opposite. I think if you're a lesbian, you're a gay man, somebody people might be in the middle, like they're not hanging out. They're in this community fighting together, sort of a caucus of human rights, but they're not at the same bar, right?
Yeah.
These women are hanging out like me. I'm like let's talk about this blonde over here at GM, and they were like, I'm beyond offended. And they wrote my board. I was CEO of the group. And I was so apologetic. I was like, but after that, we had this long talk, and I was like, in some of those meetings at that point in my life, I must have been 29, 30 or something. And I was like, I'm punching above my weight, and I was nervous. And I thought that I had to compensate, make jokes that were inappropriate. But I had to be like a bigger man than I was. And by man, I mean the crass old man that, again, spits whiskey in your face and smokes too many cigars when no one else in the room is smoking. I thought I had to be that guy. I would wear bigger glasses, leave them down on my nose. I wear bigger clothes that didn't fit me, so I looked like a bigger dude. And my point in trying to answer the beginning of your question is, I learned a lot of these lessons of puffery when I was into one of the oldest industries, in America, working with a bunch of guys who talked about cars and women all day.
Yeah.
And they did a little bit of work on the side. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm learning, but I am, even to tell that story right now, like I'm forever, I feel guilty about it still right now. But I told him, I was like, this is an act. I was like, I'm doing an act. This is my drag. I don't even want to wear this blue suit. But people think I look, interesting enough in it. So I do it. I'll dress up. And they started laughing. They were like, this is your drag. And this is before RuPaul got on TV, talking about everybody's wearing drag. I was like, well, this is mine. The collared shirt is what I rock because I was trying to keep a job. And now I'm the guy who's the leader, and I'm still thinking I got to keep a job. So I'm acting like, the grand old man. So I do think it comes from the things we see. And that is why representation matters. You being here, so many other people being here, at Primo Water and elsewhere, it changes how we think we need to interact in the world. How you all being women interact in the world is radically transforming everything else. Every other group that we talk about from a D&I standpoint is tiny compared to the fact that half or more of the workforce are women, right?
Yes.
So that matters, right? Now, with regards to incentivizing, as the engineer, what I am good at is incentivizing the incremental change. And I think in every other profession, if we can call a D&I profession, which I think maybe we can start to over the past 2 years, but I would not have called it a rigorous industry style profession before 2021. And that's because in every other profession, we have some general consensus, some starting point about what it is. Like if you ask 10 people at Primo, what did D&I mean in 2010 or yesterday, they'll give you 10 different answers about HR. And they're not right, but they're not wrong. Now, the best answer possible is referencing the global consensus, because the global consensus are the International Organization of Standards, breaks it up into 32 categories. And it's not just HR. It's also, has big buckets in governance stuff we do with our executives. HR obviously there's stuff we do with our employees, but also product, whether it's a service or something more tangible, and also procurement or what we call supplier diversity. And so as we get into those spaces, as we have a consensus around what things are, the way we can incentivize better acting and better people management, D&I, DEI, DEI, and B are a really good buzzword now for what we're doing. But what we're really talking about is people management. How do we better grasp and distribute the people management that makes up the lifeblood of our company? And what we can do is we incentivize good acting and good changeover of responsibilities for projects that incentivize good acting via documentation. So in the IT world, we would call this technical writing. So if we take those 32 domains and we chop them up into projects or portfolio of things that the company is distributing, the company, you all's company, anyone else, you're delivering one of four things always. Training, you could put this in that category, this conversation we're having, telling people. You're doing data extraction, whether that demographic data is an example, sentiment analysis, do you feel like you belong here? That's an example of data extraction. Internal infrastructure. So your employee resource groups, those are examples of internal infrastructure, right? And external infrastructure. If you're running a campaign, if you've joined the Latinx, Latino Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, right? Depending on what part of the country you're in, they're going to be coined different. That's a good example of external infrastructure. out of those 4 things that you're doing, you can portfolioize it specific to a business unit. You can assign responsible parties for how you've engaged those. And then you use those advisory boards, the internal infrastructure like employee resource groups, et cetera, to ask accountability. The 2 things that people hate the most, and it's not a bad thing, it's a regular thing. I hate it myself. My husband was just talking to me about washing clothes. We hate accountability and change. And the most expensive type of business service to deliver anywhere, number 1, is corporate change management. It's not because corporations don't like to change, it's because people are like, I found a good groove here. Don't rock my boat tomorrow. I'm grooving. So they don't like that change. They don't like the accountability piece. So I think when we think about ERGs, employee resource groups, advisory boards, they're all same thing. Those add accountability, but they're not the workers, right? For how you deliver inclusivity. Inclusivity is a set of policies that then they check off and say, yeah, this represents the Asian American community well, this represents the disabled community well, we like it, push it through. And then you deliver it to the management level in the business units saying, we want to see X, Y, Z, when and how we can. And then you've got a real corporate conversation going on. Now you're like talking about timelines and budgets. Like, well, I know over here in the field, we can do X, Y, Z by June 2025, and it's going to cost this much. But I don't have enough time and resources to give it more than an hour a week to do blah, blah, blah. So this is why. So now you have justification. You're exploring that with accountability. Maybe there's some rumbling in the ERGs about what should change, but that back and forth, you start to get that incremental change. And you have a manager, someone who sees the whole portfolio and saying, I see activity over here, I don't over there. Maybe I need to have a 15-minute or 30-minute rundown with them. It's on the schedule. It's, June 8th. I'll holler at them on July 13th, blah, 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 right? But that's how people with collared shirts, no offense to folks who don't have on collared shirts right now, that's how we're normally communicating changes. And I think that is the best way to incentivize inclusivity, knowing that the people in your company all come from somewhere and they've all learned good and bad habits from that somewhere. But we lead with do unto others. If you're stepping on feet, not only get off, but we're the kind of group that says, I'm sorry. Before we realize, hey, this person's wearing big red clown shoes, it's like, that's what they're into. They identify as a big red clown shoe person. So if you can remember, acknowledge that they are that right now. All of that stuff matters, right? But I think that standardization and very gradual documentation of what you plan to do when and who's responsible for that plan, and when you plan to revisit that plan to see if it needs to be updated. Those 3 things, that's how you implement. And what I'm actually explaining here is what we would call a maturity model. So for folks not familiar, over the past 40 years out of Carnegie Mellon, the whole world has been quantifying qualitative acts at companies via something called a capability maturity model. You can Google CMMIs, C, 2 M's, I's, and my accent runs those M's together sometimes.
MMMI, okay.
Yeah. But if you look at those, that is how we deliver corporate services everywhere. And we did that previously. We did it with accounting when people were like, we can't streamline everything, but we did with IT and cyber. It was like, we can't really quantify all of our risks and who leaves us exposed. It's just a business process. It's like, sure, we can. We can tell people this is what you're responsible for. We're going to come back and revisit. They'll gradually get more familiar with it. Remember we used to have jump drives everywhere and people moving data left and right and exposing us to viruses. Don't do any of that anymore. The world can change, but it is really a proxy of our ability to set goals, monitor the maturity of that goal, and then revisit its viability over time. And
people management.
It's all people management. And through that people management, we can reduce some of those implicit biases, unconscious biases. If we have system in place to say, you know what, man, that joke you made, that COO over at GM, not cool. Here's why. And you go, oh, I didn't know. That's how we talk over here.
Yeah.
Conversation. It's like, I hear you. We're not in a locker room anymore. So, and you go, you're right. Like the person just needs to be of that culture, like acknowledge it. Let's
Right.
move from it. We got work to do. We're not here to, bury you under the company today. That can happen, but we don't have time. Like, I don't have time to do that with you today.
Right, right.
We didn't sign it, right? So yeah, I think it's that again, making it a measure of corporate change management is hyper important. And we're starting to see it company by company, mid-size, small and large. And I think that's what we'll see over this course of this decade. I think by 2030, this will seem like a really old conversation.
You think so?
I do. I think it'll take that long. I think it'll take 10 years. But I'm only in this space because I saw this happen when I transitioned out of autos and I got a job working for Hewlett Packard. I remember, and it was in the name of the group, the arm was called automation. And we sold tech and automation tools to my portfolio of clients who were insurance companies, which is the industry I'm technically in now. And when we talked about automation back then, this is, to put a date on it, I'm thinking 2005. I'm thinking automation is robots walking in the street, right? And what I realized is it was actually Lean Six Sigma, which if folks aren't familiar, it's a process where you map out everything that someone does every day. So it's like I wake up, I put my socks on, I put my shoes on, then I put my pants on. And people like, the engineer's like, well, maybe if you tried the pant leg before the shoes, it'd be less of a mess. Not saying it's always a mess, but and maybe it's more manageable. Doing that and looking at that process across everyone putting on pants, legs, and shoes has streamlined how we automate all processes. Because now you can wake up and there's an app that tells you, put your sock on. Put your pants on first. You walk over by the shoes, like, not the shoes, the pants, then the shoes. And be like, that makes sense. That makes sense. Brush then floss, floss then brush, whatever it is. We have over the past 20 years mapped out and microized every process that humans engage in and work. And something that I used to hear people say we could never achieve, which was automating how we deliver all business services, has been done. And a company, we used to use this tiny app when I was at Hewlett Packard called ServiceNow that helped us map out how we do that things. Today, that company, ServiceNow, is 5 times the size of Hewlett Packard because they map out how everyone does everything. So I've seen it happen. And to go a step further, I saw it happen in cyber, where firms were getting hacked about 7, 8 years ago, and the hacks really increased. And companies were calling insurance, like, we just need more insurance to get us out of this, right? It's a business issue. Like, we cannot manage people. When people hear the word cyber, I think they think about technology. It's not about tech. It's about how you manage the distribution of the tech that you own. It's really a people management issue. And I'll tell you, the most disgruntled people who will leave your company exposed are people who feel slighted from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. They're like, here today to work. So we're going to let all the viruses in the door. And that's a risk for everyone. And so we've seen standards be put on how companies distribute and manage their technology in general. And they have changed the way we all work. And they've had to do it because the financial and insurance industry has said, if you don't do it, we are not underwriting any business that you do anymore because it can all be lost overnight. We're starting to see the same thing in diversity and inclusion where lawsuits are through the roof. The Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which if folks are not familiar, is the federal body that monitors, they're the enforcement body for grievances. They bucket things in 2 places, retaliation and discrimination. They saw complaints. We thought they were going to go down after the pandemic. Last year, rise by 20%. And they've been, before that, they were going up at about 7 to 10% every year for the past 12 years. Now, the insurance industry, my folks are saying corporate America and corporate world are spending somewhere between 10 to $15 billion a year arguing over who pulled whose hair and said what. It's an economics issue. But the only way to manage the bad economics of grievances is to actually implement real people management, to standardize how we do that. And companies are essentially starting to have to prove their maturity, their capability at delivering people management to their insurers in order to get directors and officers or employment practice liability insurance. Now, when we say there's a real cost to being less than inclusive, we really mean it, and we're calculating it via your insurance premium. It's not just, this is what it costs to hire a DEI team or the CHRO. You add that number to this other bigger number that it takes just to insure your company, so.
It's all interconnected, to your
Yeah.
point. And I think at a certain point, and you've been in this space for a while, pre-2020, let's just say the line of demarcation was 2020, pandemic, George Floyd's murder, the lynching of George Floyd, let's be honest, right? So you saw companies that were typically tagged as progressive for having a budget for D&I and all that, versus if you're not in it professionally, you're missing the boat. So that catalyst, as tragic as it was, I think has set us on the right path. And this is an example of it. I'm really proud that we're able to sort of hold this space for this dialogue with the team today. And I do know the team's been chatting me. James, they want to ask some questions. Okay, so if it's okay with you, wanted to open it up for a couple questions from the team. If somebody wants to come off mute and ask, feel free.
Yeah, I do see. If I see there's a Detroiter in there, I see Eric.
Yes, Eric shouted out Detroit. He had to go hop on a flight.
Oh, he did? Okay, yeah.
Did anyone want to go first?
Hi, this is Regina Moore. How you doing?
Regina, yep.
James, how you doing? Thank you for coming out to speak to us. Just looking at your, listening to your experiences and the community you come from, I'm glad to see that we are not only just experiencing unconscious bias or biases in just the workplace. I do see now that it's happening across a broader spectrum, even in our government. What I would like to say is that awareness is what I feel, or my paradigm, where it comes from. And being that you made the point that this older gentleman mentioned that he was from Georgia and African Americans were not included in his community. I think that's something that he just wasn't aware of, that was strike or hit the nerves of his peers around him. And I think that just comes from him just being, not saying older or the age, he just wasn't used to the younger generation actually now putting their feet down to say, hey, that makes me uncomfortable. So now, prior to coming to my place here at Primo, when I walked into meetings, the hosts will always give us the ground rules. They will always lay out the topic and, make sure that we're speaking to a whole. So those biases are aware, but you just don't speak without knowing your surroundings. So I think it's good now to see that we're actually seeing these biases in the midst of everything, our government, our community, and at home. And I feel as an advocate to say, it is my responsibility to address the peers or the company around me to say, this is a safe space. This is a place that we want to speak. We want to speak about our biases so we can learn from those. Because if we don't speak about them and if we don't talk about them, those biases go behind closed doors again, and we continue the behavior. So I think the more we talk about it, no matter what form we're in, it's always good to set the tone, say, hey, we all come from different backgrounds, especially when we're in a work environment, we're in a meeting, and you do the icebreaker and people say, hey, they just start talking off random conversation, not knowing that it may offend someone that's in the room. So thank you for coming aboard and just giving me the opportunity to see that it's not only in the workplace, that it's everywhere. And it's in our own groups that we associate ourselves with. So thank you for coming aboard, and I'll make sure that I follow you just to keep abreast of what you're talking about in the community.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, you're right. I mean, look, I won't say that every meeting, requires a conversation, but I think people should, hopefully we're trending towards a space and time where people are comfortable saying when they're uncomfortable with the general workplace culture. And again, I can go back to autos and energy and think about guys even roughhousing, and I'm like, I don't necessarily Well, look, I'm saying this for other people. I don't necessarily want to wrestle or curse you out, but I was actually the other guy. I was horrible. I was like, let's do it. Like, let's flip these tables up. That's a problem. But what I will say too is when we think about outside of our workplace, or we think outside of Primo, I think I meet people every day who are asking me, do I feel hopeful about tomorrow? And just, I know that media headlines are powerful, but I'm a capitalist, and I'm a believer in that the market is and has been and will continue to drive more inclusion because it absolutely requires it. Even when we look at the data this month, when we talk about Pride Month and the fact that more than 70% of Americans are like, yeah, let the queer people do what they're doing. And the other thing is we're extremely tiny portion of the broader American population. Seeing that change from when I was a kid and was like, there's no way I'm telling anybody, and 1989, that's different, right? So that's a big change, but mainly what it says to the S&P 500 and the FTSE 2000 and the broader market of large publicly traded companies that are out there is we have a market to serve, right? The more we microize the market, and I'll tell you just one economist wonky thing that we think about. So the old me was mechanical engineer. The new me is macroeconomist. And I still think about economic issues as distribution problems in the same way I thought about mechanical problems. And what I will say is that when you all hear people on the news talk about GDP, gross domestic product, whether it's at the national, state, or other level, GDP is really a measure of transactions, right? And our GDP has grown because the way this country works is we incentivize more people to leverage their individual agency to make transactions on their behalf. And what it's done is change the sorts of products and services that we demand. To make a really crass but real example about it, when you look at LVMH, which stands for Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy, they're one of the biggest companies on the planet. Their CEO's the richest man on the planet. They own Rihanna's underwear company, and she's made them about $2 billion a year selling underwear they didn't think they could sell to people of different shades, people of different genders, and people of different sizes that don't look like what I used to see. Like every brassiere, not that I've ever bought a bra, looked like something Madonna would wear in 1985. Now they look a lot of different ways. That's because there are a lot of different people out there that need those products. So whether it's water or consumer goods of other sorts, right? The market demands that we micro-identify, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, so that we can better provide products and services in the market. And that is the main reason that I'm confident that we will overcome this moment that we're in right now. We're certainly getting some pushback, but people who go to work every day and want to solve distribution problems by engaging folks and make a little bit of money to send their kids to school, et cetera, they're going to keep chipping away at trying to identify a market. And that's what we do. That's essentially all we're doing when we go to work every day. We're trying to exploit some market that we identify, make sure that we supply the demand that we think we see. But the other reason to your statement that we should speak up for who we are and how we feel in some of these meetings is that experience that we have, which may or may not be biased from where we come from, it informs how we should engage the market. When you get to that VP, EVP, SVP, et cetera level, the CEO wants to know what you think about the market so they can figure out if they're distributing it the right way. So like, I need everybody at the table. I can't afford for you to come here and clam up and not say anything. Tell me what I don't know. If you make me $1 tomorrow, I'll promote you, right? So that's what we're seeing in the workplace. And that's why we need everyone to show up. Again, I show up, I'm a white man, but maybe I shouldn't show up like this. Maybe I should talk more about, that I'm tired of wearing this shirt. I got 50 of these and I just wear them till they turn yellow. It's a problem. But I'm of a certain age and this is the role that I'm playing. So yeah, show up in those meetings. Sorry if that was long-winded.
No, that's great. And Regina, I think you hit the nail on the head with, we talk about our One Primo Way behaviors and courage and empowerment, and we should all feel empowered. It applies to this dialogue too, right? Not just what's best for our customers or what's best for our marketing portfolio, all those things. It certainly applies to these conversations at work too, because studies show, of course, the more diverse and inclusive a company culture is, the more competitive edge it brings to the market. It's just undeniable. So again, in enabling this dialogue is really important and really special for our organization. I had a chat question come in. This is from James. I don't know, James, if you want to come off mute, but I could certainly read it. What do you advise for categorizing types of unconscious bias and for individuals to work on their own to overcome these? I'm thinking of the LinkedIn Learning class by Stacey Gordon.
Yeah. Well, I get LinkedIn Learning is one of them. Look, I would say, if you all have a learning and development department, which is one of the 32 domains in the new ISO standard, the new ISO 30415 standard, maybe allotting some time for folks to, seek out and pursue certain trainings that help them at least engage their unconscious bias. But I think we're living in this new era where people are being forced to, I'm going to reappropriate language, sort of come out as whoever they are, right? Whether it's even folks come out like if I'm a white guy, a certain kind, right? I'm Irish, or I'm Italian, or I'm et cetera, et cetera. My sister just got her genome sequence. We realized we're like 23% Ashkenazi Jew and only like 19% Nigerian after that. So, that's where all of this comes from. So, but as we learn more about ourselves, we learn how we engage the world, how we want to show up at work, maybe how we want to participate in our communities, in our neighborhood, and maybe we bring our work into that because maybe there's a matching program for how we get in and how we done it. I would say that, but with regards to the types of unconscious bias, you could assume there are endless amounts. You could assume there are 8 billion types of diversity on the planet for the people and 8 billion types of bias on the planet. But the kind that we heard the ISO standard in Geneva and here in the United States really acknowledge most are what we call the 27 diversity types. And these 27 types are the protected classes. They're either protected classes in one country or another that caters in to the ISO standard in Geneva. And the reason that we acknowledge those is because those are protected classes, again, in one place or another, because they've been deliberately engaged and exploited in one way or another. So when we think about conscious bias, I don't know that we're being always going to compel everyone to be a philosopher and engage every facet of themselves as much as we can formally via governance bodies and our corporations engage folks to be aware of these 27 groups. And they're not just what you would think. It's not just age, race, gender, et cetera, but even like parenting type.
Family oriented, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the 27 groups, right? Whether you're, a person with kids or not, and how your employer might think of the time that you have to spend on a project. It's like, I can't find childcare. I got to factor that in. So things like that, right? Your location and where you come from. I've seen employee resource groups in Chicago at a large credit body that I won't say the name of, that has employee resource groups just for women who graduated from University of Tennessee because they were being discriminated against in Chicago. And I think the people in Chicago also sound like they're from Tennessee just because of how their accent matches with the people from Minnesota and the people from Michigan, right? But the point is, those women felt that way. They had more than 100 people. Apparently they recruited a lot down at University of Tennessee. And so the point is they were engaging that locale-based bias, and they were able to compel the broader organization to think about how Illinois people interact with Tennessee people, right? So I would say if you're trying to do it formally, I would start with those 27 groups because those are the groups that actually also get you in trouble. If your bias is, you're a Lakers fan versus a Boston fan, that might not be top priority, right? But those 27 groups, I think, are something worth engaging in. And I should say, if you're not a Lakers fan and you are a Boston fan, then I'm biased towards you. But but we all have some self-work to do, me included. I'm going to start with me. So that's where I would start. I would start on those 27 for sure.
Well, you started this conversation talking about biases against people who are in LA. So I'm not going to let you know where I'm sitting right now.
I'm biased towards both in New York.
Okay.
I'm a hater each way. So
You're right. Everybody can get it, right? I got it. Yeah, we're coming up on the top of the hour. I just want to let it breathe just for a minute. If there's any other questions from the team, I see you, Cree. Anybody else have anything for James? Okay, well, why don't you close us out?
Yeah, I think what I would say, I guess what I'd like to leave you all with is, just the idea. Again, I do a bunch of these, especially around this month and sometimes in September. I don't know why September is always a hot speaking time for me, but it tends to work out. But I would say is, lead with grace. I would try to always assume that people mean the best. And again, a lot of us can and are having bad days as we come in and out of the workplace. Think about your worst day. And again, lead with grace. I would say the numbers support that we should all be hopeful about the inclusion of people in the normal economy tomorrow, at least more so than they were yesterday. Don't believe the hype in the news, and use what you would deliberately pursue from an inclusivity standpoint at work. Use that in your regular life, whether that's just something as small as opening a door, especially for someone who doesn't look like you. Even if you deem yourself as the minority of minorities, if you are, the darkest sister, the queer one, the disabled one, etc., going out of your way. And I know folks like we shouldn't have to put everybody on our backs, but sometimes it's just those little human things of going out of your way to, be nice. As cliche and corny as that sounds, or even just when you see people acting out, thinking they're having a really bad go today, and I'm gonna lead with grace. I think that's the best way to approach all of these things. And again, make sure when you're thinking about your own bias, just look around, make sure you're not stepping on anybody's toes while you're talking about that bias. I think as long as you're in that pocket, you're probably in a good place. And no matter who calls you out about anything, you're probably going to get through it. Because I do think that that's a thing too. People have a general fear of being called out for something that they're not guilty for. And I would just say, lead with grace, make sure you're not stepping on anybody's toes, and
incremental growth.
And incremental growth is likely gonna work out. Yeah, from the corporate side, we'd always focus on incremental growth. Don't try to boil the ocean at once. You're not gonna do everything, post George Floyd. And employees get that. From a corporate standpoint, I would just say to Primo in general, communicating to your employees, because they are wise, that you have a plan to incrementally grow over time is the best thing you could do. Speakers are nice, but a lot of folks are like, well, this speaker isn't going to change our life here. So you follow the speaker with an incremental plan. And that's the way corporations work. That's how we have changed the world over the past 200 years, by corporatizing that incremental growth. And we're all here benefiting from it, using technology to talk to each other from far away. And it's a bunch of brown faces here. It's just, I'm still in awe, as used to all these things as I am at this point. I'm regularly in awe of what we can do. And so yeah, I'm excited. Normally, I'm excited.
Awesome. James, thank you.